Welcome to the E-Rotary Coastal Club meeting on July 6, 2017. This is Philip Zimmerman. I'm the club president. And Charles Gagne in Theriot, Louisiana is our president-elect, and he's the master of controls down there in Theriot. And we want to welcome you today. We like to start every Rotary meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance, having just gone through the 4th of July celebration. The American flag does represent a lot more than just stars and stripes. It represents freedom. If you've never read the Declaration of Independence, I was told by a broadcaster, or recommended by a broadcaster on a baseball game I was watching this weekend, and he happened to mention on July 4th that he was a direct descendant of a person who signed the Declaration of Independence, and so he gave his name, and so I looked him up, and sure enough, he was there. And he recommended, if you've never read the Declaration of Independence, to go ahead and read it. And I've read the Declaration. I thought I'd read the Declaration, and I've read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but it's been a long time. I went back and read the Declaration of Independence, and it really is a pretty phenomenal document that these gentlemen put together back in 1776. So I do encourage you to go back and read that document so that you can understand the condition that those people found themselves in this land far away from England. And as they broke away and declared independence, there was a reason why they did it. There were many reasons why they did it, and they list it there in the Declaration of Independence. And very thankful for what they did back then, and it allowed us to have freedom here in the United States, unlike anywhere else in the world. And in that freedom, we pledge allegiance to our flag. And so that's what we'll do in the Rotary tradition. I'll start off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. That's our Pledge of Allegiance. And then in the Rotary tradition, there is what was called the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. And these are the guiding principles for Rotarians, as we are a service organization where we help our fellow citizens in the communities in which we reside with whatever may come our way. There's 6 areas of service that Rotary International focuses on, and each of those 6 ways of service is what we hold to be true in our core values. And so, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And that's the again, the 4-way test, and part of that test is the reason why we actually started the E-Rotary Coastal Club, was to provide an opportunity in District 6200 of Rotary International, the opportunity to bring our coastal communities together to address issues that are unique to coastal residents. I put it in an email I put out earlier in the week that for some the salt life is really a kicked back lifestyle, where for others it's a daily battle against the elements of nature and man-made challenges that are faced by coastal communities daily. And so what we are doing here at the E-Rotary Coastal Club is bringing together speakers who are expert in their field and who are dealing with coastal issues of one form or another. And today is no different. Today we have Seth Blitch. He's been working in the Gulf of Mexico for 27 years and is currently the Director of Coastal and Marine Conservation for the Louisiana chapter of the Nature Conservancy. He's heavily involved in the recovery of oyster resources through restoration projects and policy and management engagement. He also secures funding for and manages natural infrastructure projects in the development and application of decision support tools. He works with colleagues in the freshwater sphere to develop and implement projects that account for and improve the connectivity among freshwater resources and their impact to coastal processes and ecosystems. And I was talking with Seth earlier before the meeting started, prior to coming to the Nature Conservancy, Seth was director of the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve, located in the Florida Panhandle. And while there, he oversaw the efforts to characterize how changes in water supply from the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint Basin were expressed in the natural communities of Apalachicola Bay. Beautiful area of our country, and again, the coastal challenges there as well. So, Seth, with that introduction, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and please allow us to give you a good audience for your presentation.
All right. So thank you very much. There it is. Okay. Thanks very much. Again, my name is Seth Blitch, and I'm our Coastal Program Director here with the Nature Conservancy in Louisiana. For those who don't know, the Nature Conservancy is a large, as in global conservation, not-for-profit 501c3 conservation organization. We're active in all 50 states and in about 73 countries around the globe, and we have personnel in about 36 or so of those countries. Overall, we're about somewhere around 3,800 staff globally. Probably better known for buying land for conservation purposes than anything else, but we actually do. We have government relations specialists, and we do a lot of coastal work around North America and globally as well, and so fairly diverse organization. I started my career in the private sector. I worked in the public sector for a long time, and have been now in NGO. So anyway, that's a brief introduction to TNC, and I'm going to talk a little bit about oysters and oyster restoration and recovery in the Gulf of Mexico. I know you've had a lot of speakers talk about land loss and some of the issues with the loss of fresh water and sediment from the Mississippi River and how that's impacted coastal Louisiana. And so those things are related to oysters for sure. And I may touch on them. And again, if you have any questions about them, as I go through there, just shout them out. But we in the Nature Conservancy, we actually in all 5 states in the Gulf have some sort of oyster restoration or recovery project ongoing. These projects, have the intent of putting out substrates in the water on which oyster larvae will settle and mature into adult oysters and then reproduce on site and ultimately become just a natural reef. Oyster reefs themselves, oysters, they're filter feeders, which means they're bivalves, which means they have a shell with 2 halves. Those 2 halves open and close and filter water. In the act of doing that, they feed, but they also improve water quality because they filter out, excessive levels of nutrients, especially things like nitrogen and phosphorus. Oyster reefs, as you know, stick up into the water column, and in so doing, when they're adjacent to shorelines, they actually abate or deflect wave energy, which protects the shoreline from erosion. And they can also act to trap sediment, which helps in offsetting land loss or even sometimes building land. And then if you fish, you know that oyster reefs are great places to fish because they hold a lot of fish and crustaceans in different parts of their life cycle. So oysters get called ecosystem engineers frequently because they're unique because they're a single species that, while they are a fishery and often managed as a commodity, they are also a habitat, just like mangroves are a habitat or salt marsh or anything like that. And so they're kind of an interesting thing to work on, despite the fact that they're not very charismatic to look at.
Well, I was just listening to all my things.
Seth.
Well, yes, I'm having a hard time understanding the slide.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to see if I can. Well, I can't get out of here at all.
Did you want to let me retrieve the presenter role?
Yeah, how do I get that back?
I'll take it back and let you.
Okay, take it back and then give it back?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, let me try that again. All right, Charles, let's do that one more time, and I'm going to use the other opening I have. I think that might work. All right. Okay, that worked.
Okay.
All right, can you all see that, the second slide?
Yes, sir. You should have a prompt on your screen to present, accept it.
Okay, I got it.
There you go. Yeah.
All right. Try this again. Sorry, everyone.
That's no problem.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, and so on this second slide, I pulled another title slide from a presentation I gave a while back, which kind of touches on this subject, which is oysters as a fishery and a habitat, and or having your oysters and eating it too. There's been a lot of discussion when you talk about oysters. It arouses a lot of passions in folks who like to fish off of reefs or make a living from harvesting reefs or work really hard on restoration and conservation. And frequently that conversation gets framed in an either or. And it is my belief and experience that it really can be an and scenario, which is why I have this screen title for this one. And also, if you have any follow-up questions, my email address is at the bottom of the slide. I'll have it at the end again. So oysters have declined globally pretty significantly over the last 100 years or so for multiple reasons. There are, from intense fishing pressure to changes in upland areas where forests were logged or areas were developed and rivers started to become loaded with sediment that they didn't normally have because of runoff, and oyster reefs got buried. There's been issues with pollution, as has been our direct experience in the Gulf. We have an event like a spill, which is bookended by a number of hurricanes, which can also act to bury reefs. So there's many reasons why you can have oysters and shellfish populations decline. That said, the Gulf of Mexico is probably globally and in this country still one of the more productive areas of the country for oysters. And that means that we've only lost about 50 to 80%, which is, so that's not really setting the bar high, but in a comparative sense, that's pretty good. And then I've got two data slides, and I promise not to bore you with any more data. But the first just gives you a sense of how productive in North America the Gulf of Mexico is. That sort of filled-in gray area represents landings, and this is commercial production, not necessarily how many oysters there are, but it's a good proxy. And so you can see areas like, look at the solid black line, Chesapeake, and how much it had and how much it currently is being harvested, at least until 2009. You can see the Gulf has been pretty steady, and since this only goes to 2009, I'm sure many of you are saying, yeah, but what about the spill? So here is the data from the National Marine Fisheries Service that shows, you can see the 2010 line there. The spill obviously was in 2010. You can see this purple is Louisiana. Of all the 5 states in the Gulf, Louisiana, we produce by a long shot way more oysters than any other state. You can see the precipitous decline in the year of the spill in many states. What is noticeable, to me at least, is that since then, it's been a pretty steady trend up through 2015. And if you look at the other 4 states, they really have not. And there are many reasons for that. We'll talk about some of that in a bit. One is, let me go back. Okay. One of the reasons in Louisiana is that, again, if you think about oysters as a fishery or commodity, about 97% of that production comes off of private leases. The state traditionally has leased land to individuals or companies, and they will mulch those leases in the water. And mulch just means putting material out like either oyster shell or limestone. And then again, the larvae will settle on those, and they'll sort of cultivate those. And when they're ready, 3 inches is the legal size to harvest an oyster. They'll harvest them and take them to market. That said, there's more than 4 times the aerial coverage of public sea grounds, so common areas that are designated or where oysters grow, but there's only 3% of the commercial production comes off of those. So the potential to both recover oysters after events like hurricanes and oil spills or intense harvesting pressure is great, but I would submit that the conditions necessarily aren't right for that yet, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So one of the things that the Nature Conservancy does in this area, and not the only thing, is that we have, as I mentioned, done some restoration projects. And restoration means different things to different people. When I say it, most of the time I mean what I mentioned earlier, which is to, put some sort of substrate in the water that has the right conditions, which is salinity and the availability of oyster larvae, such that you can grow a reef over time, a functioning reef that has the vitality to last generations and generations, and to provide a bunch of ecosystem services, and as well as hopefully increase commercial production for either nearby leases or public sea grounds, so that if we are successful in growing a reef somewhere, that when those oysters spawn, when they reproduce, the oysters just emit sperm and egg out of the water by the jillions, and then those that have to find each other will produce a larvae. There's several larval stages where they're part of the zooplankton, and then they eventually start to add shell. And when they do add shell, they become heavier, they don't swim anymore, and they fall out. And if they fall out on a suitable substrate, like an oyster reef or one of these restoration projects, they actually will attach and continue to grow throughout their life and reproduce. So that's kind of the goals of our projects, is to, again, both act as means to stabilize the shoreline, recover oyster populations, improve or maintain water quality, be a habitat for all kinds of other recreationally and commercially important species, and hopefully also bolster the commercial side of oysters. So on this screen, you can see a few ways that restoration projects are affected. They're certainly not the only ways. In this upper left-hand corner is a project that was done in Alabama, very volunteer-friendly in that people would bag shell. We had a lot of oyster shell donated, and it's put into bags. And then those are all stacked together to sort of make a large mound-shaped reef that, again, hopefully will have oysters attach and grow to it over time. Upper right is these baskets, gabion baskets. They're just wireframe baskets that can be filled with all kinds of things. We're in the middle, we're just starting a project in Calcasieu Lake right now, on the west coast of Calcasieu Lake. It's going to be about a mile long, and we're using gabion baskets and shell and limestone, and we're going to put those along the shore in West Cove. And hopefully we should be done with that this summer. And that will give us about a total of 6 miles of reef that the Nature Conservancy has been able to install in Louisiana over the last, say, 6-7 years. In Florida, in the Indian River Lagoon on the East Coast, they've used these oyster mats where they've actually taken shells, drilled a hole in it, and then used zip ties and put them on the mats, and then fasten the mats to the bottom. They've done this in some areas where boat wakes were a problem and were starting to erode the shoreline. And then you'll see the bottom right are reef blocks, which have been used in Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. And we used them when we years ago when we got some money through the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, stimulus funds. And we went this route then because building these little triangle units one by one actually is really labor intensive, and the whole thrust of the stimulus funding was to put people to work. And So we were able to either maintain or create about 104 jobs over the life of that project. A lot of that was through the assembly of these reefs, and so it was another way to demonstrate that there's a real economy around restoration activities as well. Okay, and then just a couple slides to give you a sense of how quickly oysters can grow in the Gulf of Mexico in particular. These little rings on the top are something else that we've used frequently. You can see that, after 2 years of them being out, you can hardly see what the original shape of that cast concrete ring is. It just looks like a fairly natural clump of oysters. And then on the bottom is one of these reef block units, the triangle units that we put out. This one was in St. Bernard Parish, and inside of a month it had a really pretty healthy growth. I mean, not a month, a year, it had a pretty healthy growth of oysters. In the Gulf of Mexico, oysters get to harvestable size, which is, again, that's about 3 inches in anywhere from 12 to 18 months. By way of comparison, Chesapeake Bay takes about almost 3 years to get a mature oyster. The difference being that the water is colder there and things grow slower. And I've kind of covered some of this, but again, to harken back to the title of sort of what restoration means for folks, it could mean stock enhancement, in production, or it could mean restoration for ecosystem services, or and for some, it's thinking about oysters strictly as a commodity, and for others, it's strictly as a valued habitat. And again, I would submit that it's not an either-or discussion, but again, a hybrid, or that there are ways to do both. And in fact, it is in sort of the collective stakeholder interest of all those who have an interest in oyster resources to think about it in a fairly integrated kind of way. Having robust fisheries, I personally love to eat oysters, and so and coming from Apalachicola in the Florida Panhandle, that's a town that for 100 years has really built around a seafood economy and largely oysters. 90% of Florida's oysters are harvested out of one bay, and that's Apalachicola. And so, that really gives Apalachicola a sense of place. And it gives the people there not only a sense of place, but have this real visceral connection to their resource. And so they are keen to protect it in a way, because by protecting the resource, they're protecting their livelihoods. And there's a working waterfront. That said, because of the way that has been managed there for a long time, it also presents a lot of opportunities for fishing guides and things like that. And because it's been managed so well for so long, that bay has remained healthy for a very long time. And so, and that positively affects everyone that lives on the bay, whether they're interested in oysters or not. So there's some real benefits from, again, working together on sort of the shared interests around oyster resources, both as a habitat and as a fishery. When we do restoration in this state, I mentioned that there is a lot of leasing, where the state leases out public bottoms to private interests, and they cultivate their own lease as they see fit. This is a map of some leases in the southeast part of the state. And so when we do a restoration project, we, right now, and it's not that it's impossible, we've not been able to do it yet, have to find a place where we have suitable conditions, where we know oysters are going to grow and survive, and where there's probably an adjacent need on the shoreline for land loss, which is pretty much anywhere. But we have to find a place that's not leased. And so there are some, because like I said, we've done about 6 miles worth of reefs so far. But they are hard to find, between trying to squeeze in projects between leases and ensuring that they're not over existing energy infrastructure like pipelines. And in Louisiana in particular, there are not many places that meet those criteria and where you can still grow oysters. And this map just gives you sort of an idea of why that is. Not a bad or a good thing, it's what are the prevailing conditions here. And so one of the challenges to restoration. Ideally, I did like to get to a place where we're working with leaseholders a lot more, and they were very supportive of having restoration projects done, maybe within their leases. where it doesn't get in the way of their own, sort of, the commercial enterprise part of it, but at the same time can bring real benefits to them, hopefully, like increasing production. And I put this in a slide in because it's a good way to kind of visualize what healthy habitat looks like with oysters, and habitat with oysters looks like where it's managed differently. And again, neither of these is sort of bad or good. I think it's in your perspective, but it definitely gives you a good contrast. So what you're looking at on the left here, where I have typed in 3D, this is Sabine Lake. It has probably one of the largest sort of oyster reefs in Louisiana for sure, probably the Gulf of Mexico. It has not been legally harvested since 1966, so for about 51 years now. And you can see, this is a side scan sonar image from below water. You can see just sort of the changes in elevation. The bottom is not uniform, and there are places where this reef comes off the bottom, sometimes as much as over a meter. So it's tall, but it's all below the water. You don't see it. And then this picture from Galveston is an area which is farmed for oysters. Oysters grow right on the bottom in a really thin veneer, and when they're ready to be harvested, they're harvested, and then it's flat again, and it doesn't have the same features. Both are productive in their own way, and both are different in their own way, and have, I guess, there are pluses and there's very different ways to look at that, but seeing it in that kind of relief, I think, is fairly informative. It's one of the frustrations about doing a lot of work with oysters and restoration work is once you're done, your project's in the water, you almost never see it again. So it's hard to take people out and just say, hey, here's all this work that we've been doing for the last year and spent $1 million on. That said, we have done a lot of monitoring on our projects, and we use LSU frequently. They're a good third party, and that way, they take a very sort of dry science approach to it, but that's good because then we can look at the data and see where we need to improve and see what's going well, so that we can really kind of have a sort of a measure of the relative success of the work that we've done around the state and around the Gulf. I'm getting back to harvest a little bit. Some of you who follow the legislative session may have noticed that there was a bill that passed to stop the use of dredges commercially in the public sea ground that is Calcasieu Lake, and go back to using hand tongs, which were used up until 2004. For the industry, this is a tough thing because using hand tongs is a lot more work. Where I'm from in Apalachicola, that is the only way that you're allowed to harvest an oyster is by hand tongs. I've tried it before. It made me really appreciate the effort it takes to harvest it that way. And if you do it, it makes paying $1, $1.50 for an oyster a lot more palatable. The dredges that are used, they call them scrapers. Science says that they do more damage to the reef. They reduce the height of the reef. The oystermen feel differently about it. They think that it spreads it out more and helps it grow. What has happened in Calcasieu Lake, though, since 2004, when you would use dredges instead of tongs, is that we really saw a lot of that reef, and this is, again, these are public areas, not private, diminish. The season lasts less and less, fewer and fewer days every year, so it's been kind of a diminishing return. Again, folks in industry have disputed that somewhat, but the landings records are reasonably clear on that. But another thing that's exacerbated Calcasieu Lake is that in the last 10 or 15 years, the shipping channel has been deepened. And when you deepen a channel, it invites in saltier water. So the saltier the water, the heavier, and so it sits on the bottom more. And oysters like salty water just fine, but they like estuarine areas because the salinity in estuaries varies a lot. When you have pulses of fresh water, it chases away diseases and predators, and it brings food in the form of sediment, things like that. When you have periods that are droughty or more salty, they grow faster, but you don't want one or the other. You really want these dynamic conditions. And so when things like canals come in and they create saltier conditions that are more permanent, you start to see things like disease and predation go up. And so that happened at about the same time as the switch from tongs to dredges. That said, the legislation passed this session, and so it is official now, and so harvest can only be done by tongs in Calcasieu only. It doesn't affect any of the other public sea grounds in the rest of the state. But it also opens Sabine, which I just mentioned hadn't been open since 1966, for harvest as well, but only by tongs. So I mentioned sort of, again, thinking about oyster resources in an integrated kind of way because there are multiple sets of stakeholders. Again, those that rely on harvesting oysters, those that benefit from it as a habitat, whether it's for recreational fishing or protection of shoreline and building in sort of coastal resilience. I know from previous speakers you've heard probably a ton about coastal resilience. And oysters are habitat that have a pretty profound role in that where they're present. So some of the T&C work that I lead is looking at, again, thinking about sort of an integrated assessment of restoration and recovery in the Gulf. And that is not only doing more projects on the ground, but also looking at it from a policy and management side. There's going to be 160. I have 160 written here. It's 163 million dollars through the natural resource damage assessment from the big spill that is tapped specifically for oyster recovery. And so ideally, I'd like to see that definitely recover it as a fishery, but also a habitat, and hopefully not just be sort of a put and take scenario, which meaning, you culch an area, oysters go back, you harvest it, and then they're gone again. And so there's sort of no net gain over time. And that's, for $163 million, a net gain Gulf-wide over time is imminently achievable. And so I am and hope to continue to work with, the suite of stakeholders to really start to think about how that can happen. And one of those ways, which is this last bullet, is the development of sort of a regional shellfish initiative. And Sea Grant is leading an effort right now. We're working pretty closely with them on kind of laying the tenets of the pillars for this Gulf of Mexico shellfish initiative, which would bring in a sort of diverse stakeholder interest from resource managers to folks in the industry and restaurants and property owners, shoreline property owners to conservation interests, so that we're all together and understanding each other's concerns and needs around oysters and shellfish. I don't view those things necessarily as a win-win, but I do view it as a give-give, and I think that while we might not ultimately all speak the same language, we will understand each other better, and that will help us work together in a way that we have not, in my mind, done yet. I think thinking about how this can work is easy. Actually making it happen is not. But I think with a partnership or an initiative like this, it can. There are other areas of the country in New England and some of the Pacific Coast states that have shellfish initiatives that have really been able to do good things, where they really have been able to work together across stakeholder interests to recover the resource in a way that sort of, is fairly satisfactory to all of those interests. And that's what I had for questions. I think I wanted to say a few things about comparing sort of Louisiana to other places around the Gulf, and I think we have our state here, again, in terms of, strictly speaking, in terms of oysters, a huge amount of production still compared to the other states. But we're similar in some ways. Again, where I'm from in Florida, we had issues with water supply, and when you start to have a lot of consumptive use of freshwater resources upstream of estuaries, those estuaries typically get saltier, and you've seen this in Texas and a lot of other places. Those oyster resources either continue to try to move upstream, or they're lost. And not only do you lose the sort of the seafood industry side of it, you lose that coastal protection when you lose those kinds of habitats. And so making those connections and managing around, for connectivity from freshwater systems to the coast is important, and it's kind of sort of new in resource management thinking. I mean, I think it's not a new idea, but it's in terms of actually managing that way, it's very common. As I mentioned, where I'm from in Apalachicola, that the Apalachicola River was formed by the confluence of the Chattahoochee and the Flint rivers. That basin is about 20,000 square miles. 88% of that basin resides in Georgia. There are 14 federal dams and reservoirs there, which are managed by the Army Corps of Engineers in Georgia. And all of the decisions that are made on the consumptive use, whether it's for municipal use for Atlanta, which it primarily is, or ag, ultimately impact Apalachicola Bay, which is the receiving body, and oyster resources there. So that's an area that doesn't really have the economy to compare to compete with a place like Atlanta. But that's not to say that it's not important, and that honoring that kind of connectivity is important. We see it here with the Mississippi. For eons, the Mississippi, because of the freshwater and its humongous sediment load, it drains 41% of North America, has been building marsh and creating conditions where oysters have thrived. As everyone knows, it's been levied off starting in about 1927, and so that sediment is now not part of the system anymore. And because of fresh water and the sediment is shunted off at the end of the river, it's changed a lot of things. And so, a lot of those reefs that really sort of outlined that route of Louisiana have kind of moved inland because the salinities have gotten greater or more favorable farther in than they were when the river was more connected. And so those are challenges. I mean, right now, when I know you've heard a lot about diversions, but there's a lot of people in the oyster industry that don't want diversions because their leases will be negatively affected, and they really will be. There'll be some of them, if they get the sediment load like they want, they'll be buried, and some of them will become too fresh. That said, I think there might be, there are ways probably to think about how you transition people so that they don't lose that connection to place through some changes that ultimately may need to happen because there's a larger societal benefit. So I know that's what the state and folks in the industry are currently wrestling with when we think about projects related to Louisiana's master plan and what we're going to do about the coast. And I don't mean to suggest that it's all about oysters. Oysters is a part of it, but I would say that remarrying the river is probably the largest part, and the part that's just almost foundational compared to everything else. So with that, I will stop. It's hard to not have questions to hear myself talk so long. So if there are questions, I would happily entertain them.
Thank you, Seth. Does anyone on the call like to, Seth, if you can unmute the microphones if you've got them on mute, and then anyone have any question for Seth?
Well, if you have one and you want to ask it later, my email is at the bottom. You're welcome to ping me there anytime.
Seth, this is Charles. I have a question. Excuse me. I'm sorry, go ahead. Seth, I thought it was interesting that the Nature Conservancy, a global organization, is focused on coastal Louisiana. As a communications guy, I always feel like people don't really get Louisiana, particularly South Louisiana. And what brought this up on the radar of the Conservancy in the first place, and why? It's a great thing, and I agree. It needs all the attention it can get. But what brought it on the radar of the Conservancy, and about how long has that been a focus?
What brought the coast or oysters specifically?
Well, I guess either one. Once again, I believe that the other 49 states don't really understand Louisiana very well. We're associated with Swamp People and Bourbon Street, and not a lot of thought beyond that. And I mean, not entirely. That's not entirely true, but overall. And because of that, you see the nation motivated about the Pacific sea snail or the dart driller. I don't know, whatever it is. But anyway, you see these ecological issues pop up all the time, and Congress comes to their aid, and they're going to protect it, and et cetera, et cetera. But in Louisiana, I've had colleagues from around the country saying, well, isn't that swamp? Like, why do we want to save that? But anyway,
Yeah.
it's interesting that a global organization like the Nature Conservancy, is kind of, in town, so to speak. And I'm sure y'all have been at it a while. But, it's something that merits attention and nurturing and stewardship. And I was just wondering, I don't know, it's a good thing, I guess I'm saying, but I don't know if that's a recent development or if y'all have been watching it for a long time.
We have, the Nature Conservancy has been working on coastal issues for a few decades now. We've been present in the Gulf for as long. What sort of galvanized a lot of that work, though, was the spill. And by that I mean, we have 5 states doing, a seagrass project here, or maybe a restoration project here for oysters, or, an inflow project over here. But that really helped us start to think about kind of the Gulf of Mexico as a whole system. So all of the Gulf, and not just the northern Gulf, but even, the part of the Gulf that, is bordered by Mexico and to the west coast of Cuba. I mean, that entire body of water. And so, and then the specific, the interest in Louisiana is, this is, you mentioned, isn't it all swamp? It is. It's all swamp and marsh, and we should embrace it because it means a lot to the state in terms of not just seafood production. I don't even mean just oysters, but I mean, marshes confer a really high level of productivity for all kinds of life, including things that are of commercial value. And as we lose them, we also diminish those economic prospects. And so, I tend to think that a healthy ecology begets a healthy economy, and so that's part of our interest too. And then there's the cultural bent too. And I mentioned Apalachicola, where I'm from, but I think that I've been working on the Gulf for a long time, and one of the sort of rewarding things about that is that in a lot of communities that are either right on the Gulf or near the Gulf, they really have a very strong sense of place. These are the kinds of people that won't leave in a hurricane and are going to wait till the water's coming in the door before they consider doing anything different. But at the same time, that it makes those places unique and not homogenized, and so sort of the cultural capital that comes with places like, when you get around Grand Isle or Lafitte or, Steenhatchee, Florida, or, Baytown in Texas, or, all kinds of places that really have this real sort of connection to place and identify with the Gulf, I think is something that you don't, say, find on the Atlantic coast of Florida anymore, like you do. And I think that matters. And so, those are some of the reasons. A lot of us that work on the coast like to fish. We like to hunt, and again, it's good. And then in Louisiana, we have one of the largest ports, the Port of Mississippi, or the Mississippi River Port is one of the largest in the country, and we're an energy coast, and so the value of having healthy, vital coasts, impinges directly on the economy of this state and the Gulf, and so all of those things kind of come together to for the Nature Conservancy to say, look, our role isn't to necessarily get our fingers in all that, but there is, we see a conservation tie to a lot of this, and it's important. And so we spend a lot of time, working with donors and writing grants, and really, trying to gin up support for the work that we do and the work that our partners do. And we partner a lot to support the long-term care and health of the coast of Louisiana and around the Gulf of Mexico.
Thank you.
Seth, this is Philip. I was very interested in the presentation as a whole, and then just some of the things that you showed on your slides. One, the number of oyster leases in southeast Louisiana was just that was pretty amazing as far as how many oyster leases are there. And then the other one was the actual oyster production after the spill and the recovery of the Louisiana oyster production versus the other Gulf Coast states that were listed. Do you have an idea of why the recovery has been so high in Louisiana versus the other areas?
I don't have anything. So if I answer that as a scientist, I don't have good hard data that suggests why. But based on talking to folks in the industry and talking to folks, resource managers, what I think has happened is, again, in some places, oysters were directly affected by, oil or correction. But a lot of what happened in Louisiana was that, and you all remember this, we released a lot of fresh water to try to sort of push the oil away, and we didn't. It floated right over it, but it made that southeast part of the state, the coast, very, very fresh for a very long time. And oysters can handle fresh water, fully fresh water, for a while. They won't feed; they'll close up. But if they have these really long, protracted periods of fresh water, then they still will continue to stay closed and not feed, and eventually they'll atrophy and die, and it's just starve to death. And that's what happened. So a lot of the sort of damage that this state incurred, it did because it was doing what it thought was best to protect itself from oil, but but the sort of the collateral damage was that it really hurt a lot of reefs. That said, when you're doing a private lease, it's sort of to me it's a form of aquaculture where, again, like I said, you can bring in material, other shell or limestone and grow it. And once the conditions were right, I mean, the salinity of it has always been good. There's plenty of food in the water, and even after the spill, there's still plenty of larvae in the water. What we're really limited by is substrate. So if you put the substrate in, you're going to grow oysters if you put them in the right place in most instances. And so this state, more than the others, again, really relies on a lot of those private leases. Florida doesn't have any leases yet, or has a few. You're starting to see some states go towards aquaculture, off-bottom aquaculture, and this state is experimenting with that and is trending in that direction too, to also increase production. There's been a moratorium on leasing, and it has been lifted recently. And I will predict that you are going to see some new leases where people eventually you build a cage that is put on poles and it sits off the bottom, and you're able to grow oysters in really high salinity areas because in the cage, those oysters are protected from predators. So those little oyster drills, they're perfectly natural and normal, but they're snails and they like to feed on oysters. They're precluded from getting close to the oysters, so you can grow a lot of oysters in areas where they wouldn't normally live in high salinities. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that. So I think that's why. You talk to folks in industry, and they say those numbers that you get from the feds aren't wrong, and they're only, they're getting sold half sacks and not whole sacks, but they do it by weight, not by sack. And we mention that, and then you hear that, well, it's a bunch of dead shell and shorts, and that shouldn't count. And there may be some truth to that. I don't know. That's not what I do. That said, the numbers are so pronounced that, I tend to think, even if they're not accurate in terms of numbers, at least in terms of trends, that's still pretty accurate. And I think the other states, everybody in the Gulf suffered from a bad seafood reputation after the spill. No one wanted to buy Gulf seafood of any kind, oysters or otherwise. And some of the other states have been slower to recover. Apalachicola in Florida currently is having a hard time because they had a bad drought, which they've had for years, but at the same time, it was an administrative decision to keep harvesting during that drought, and then they stopped putting shell back on the reefs like they had done for decades, and those things coincided, and now they're having a hard time bringing oysters back, and they've always recovered after after droughts. Most of the challenges are how we manage ourselves, not oysters, and so, it's different in every state. A lot of times, the state management agency will vote to keep an area closed, and the next commissioners will say, well, it's going to be a hardship to, oystermen, which it will be, and they go ahead and open it again, but then next year's crop doesn't, the season doesn't last as long, and the take is not as much. And so, some of the trick in this is to try to transition people through a period where you have to keep it closed or let things recover, so they could get back to a level that can sustain fairly regular harvest, so that, again, we can sort of realize all those shared goals that we have.
Now, I was also noticing that, I guess with the receding coastline, it looked like a lot of those oyster leases were not, or really in the offshore, in essence. They weren't right along the shoreline. As our coastline recedes, is that part of the issues to continue to march those oyster beds closer to the shore and follow the shoreline up?
Well, yeah, all the leases. My understanding is those leases are always originally put adjacent to shoreline somewhere. And you're right. Now that shoreline has disappeared, they sort of sit out in the middle. They don't migrate in with the coast because they would start to fall over other leases. But that is an issue. And again, changing salinities is an issue. Some of those areas are less productive than they once were because they're saltier. And then, as you all know, we do a lot to sort of move water around in this state. 30% of the flow of the Mississippi is taken by the Chapalaya River, but that's controlled by a structure, the old river control structure near Simsport. And so, I was just back yesterday. I was in the Rockefeller Wildlife Management area looking we have some funding to do a very small project there. And areas that years past have been really productive and have grown a lot of oysters aren't because we've had so much rain over the last 2 years. And the way that it flows through there, it's managed. I mean, if they decide how it flows, it's kept it so fresh for so long that a lot of those areas have died back and aren't suitable to do a project right now. Although they will come back when they turn off those floodgates. So it's tricky in areas that sort of receive flows that are managed for multiple reasons, not just oysters. And so, this is a tough state to manage oyster resources in.
Well, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Well, I appreciate the time and the opportunity. And again, please follow up if you have any questions.
All right, Seth, we appreciate your presentation today. It was fantastic. And again, if any of you have a question for Seth, his email address sblitch, BLITCH, at tnc.org.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, very good. And then I want to remind everybody that we're going to be having a levee tour in Terrebonne Parish next Thursday. It's going to start at 10:30 at the levee parish office, and the district levee office. And Charles, can you give us a little more information on what we're doing and how we sign up for that?
Absolutely. Well, just very briefly, the Levee District Director, Reggie Dupree, is thrilled and excited about what we're doing as a club. Obviously, Rotarians are known for making things happen in the community and being involved and engaged. So anyway, he's thrilled to learn about the club. He will be a speaker in turn. But anyway, for the moment, he offered to do what he called a windshield tour or a levee top tour, where we'll be able to provide an opportunity for up to 20 of us, both in the E-Rotary and also in other Rotary clubs in the area, to convene at his office on the home air base at 10:30. We'll load up in pickup trucks. I think we'll stop for a short lunch, and then we'll drive on the levees to the flood control structures, where he'll explain, what's being done and why. And what's cool about it, even if you're not from Terrebonne Parish, I'm sure the methodologies are being deployed broadly throughout all the levee systems. And it would be just a really interesting idea to see. But anyway, we can accommodate up to 20 people. If you receive this email, all you need to do is click on this link. It'll bring you to a Google link, a Google sheet, and you can just type straight into this. You can also call or text me. You can see we're maxed at 20 people, but we still have some spots right now. But we also are going to be looking for pickup trucks. We originally were going to do this in a bus, but obviously you can't get on the levee in a bus. So anyway, we're looking for pickup trucks, that can hold several people in them to get us out there. But it's a unique opportunity, and it's one of the first public events, that extend beyond our club, and a real strong initial win, if you will, for us, to again, spread our focus and purpose. Anyway, so it'll be all of us, any of us, plus other local Rotarians, but we do need you to sign up. And if you got a truck, that helps too. Hello?
Very good. Thank you, Charles. And thank you again, Seth. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign it off for today. And everyone have a safe rest of the week and weekend coming up. And levee tour next Thursday. And the Thursday after next, we'll be hearing from Tanner Johnson. And he'll be making a presentation. and he's with the Wildlife Federation, Fish and Wildlife Federation, and he'll be talking about their activities along the coast as well. So thank you, Seth, and y'all have yourselves a safe holiday, rest of the holiday week, and we will hopefully see you next Thursday and Thursday after next for sure. Thank you.
All right, thanks.